Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess what I did not tell you is that today, the 27th of February, is also my birthday. So happy birthday to me. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and good morning. The chairman has already introduced me. My name is Kwaku Owusu Baah, and I work as the Director for Economic Studies with the InterAfrican Coffee Organization in Abidjan, Ivory Coast. My presentation this morning basically is on the African coffee industry, and this will be the presentation outline. I'll start first by looking at the global coffee situation, break it up into two periods, the period before 1989 and the period after 1989. And during the presentation, you know why I did that. I'll also look at the global coffee supply and demand equation. My next item will be to look at the African coffee situation specifically, zeroing in on the performance of the African coffee industry. Then I move on to deal specifically with the issue of policy regarding liberalization within the African coffee producing countries. Then I look at the way forward, after which I will attempt maybe to convince our investor community here to bring their money to Africa and invest in the African coffee sector. I start by saying that up until 1989, coffee production globally was driven by a quota system in the International Coffee Agreement. During that time, Mr. Chairman, Africa produced an annual average of 24.4 million bags, especially between the years 1980 and 1990. And again, Africa contributed 27% to the world coffee production. But the quota system within the International Coffee Agreement was scrapped in 1989 to allow for competition within the industry. Consequently, competition came into the industry and intensified and led to oversupply of the global coffee market. Brazil, for example, doubled her production from 24.5 million bags to 48 million bags between 1990 and year 2000, that is within a decade. And for Vietnam, production went from a mere 1 million bags in 1990 to 15 million bags in 2001, which amounts to a whopping 1,400 increase. Now, Mr. Chairman, this good performance from Brazil, from Vietnam, and from many other coffee-producing countries did happen through intensive public sector investment within the coffee industry. Now, what was the impact of the progressive production within the 10-year period, especially from 1990, after the scrapping of the quota system? Now, the huge production or the expansion of production occurred during a stable demand condition. And basic economic theory will tell you that when supply goes up and demand stays where it is, it leads to price collapse. So this exactly is what happened within the global coffee industry. And therefore, as a result, we had price collapse within the coffee industry. Globally, average coffee prices fell from about $1.28 per pound in 1983 to a mere 50 cents a pound in 2001. That amounts to 61% dip. And coffee prices have since been cyclical, caused mainly by the supply side instead of the demand side. This is the global picture Let us zero into the African condition. In Africa, Mr. Chairman, the coffee sector was further hit by a policy shift. The sector was liberalized and privatized in the late 1980s and early 1990s. And in Africa, privatization meant that either governments stopped investment in the coffee sector or reduced drastically the investment within the coffee sector. Again, in Africa, the privatization also meant that the private sector was now being called upon to play the role that the public sector was playing before the liberalization. Mr. Chairman, if you know the history of Africa, you know that the private sector in Africa is quite weak, and sometimes they are non-existent. If they do exist in name. Therefore, what happened was that when the public sector withdrew from investment within the coffee sector, the private sector was too weak and lacked the capacity to fill the gap that the state had left. So the privatization of the coffee sector in Africa brought with it numerous challenges. The first being reduced investment in the sector. The second was poor and deteriorating infrastructure. The third is low and decreasing production and productivity. We have seen overaged trees. We have seen overaged farming population. We are seeing poor access to finance. We are seeing weak and non-existent sometimes of extension support to coffee farmers. We are seeing poor coffee quality. We are seeing poor farm gate coffee prices. And we are seeing abandoned coffee farms. The combined effects of these challenges have simply been disastrous within the coffee industry of Africa. First, the African coffee production has declined since 1990 by close to 40%, from 24.4 million bags in the 1980s to 15.4 million bags in the last coffee year. And second, its global share has reduced by more than 50%, from a proportion of 27% to 12%. Mr. Chairman, what do all this mean for Africa? My view is that it's led to extensive poverty. At the national level, reduced revenues from coffee have dislocated balance of payments positions of countries and distorted national development plans. At the household level, it has led to increased unemployment and worsening poverty among practitioners within the coffee industry, leading to their limited access to social amenities like education, health, water and sanitation, and irreparable loss of livelihoods, sometimes with fatal results in some cases. Mr. Chairman, there is a growing concern, and a genuine one for that matter, that many coffee-growing countries in Africa may miss out on the MDGs. What has been the coping strategies? Well, for some coffee farmers, it's been possible for them to shift into other perennial crops like oil palm and rubber, but for others, there's been no such options. So, Mr. Chairman, my question is that I seem to be talking a lot about liberalization. So my question is that, is liberalization a Trojan horse for Africa? I don't have the answer, and I don't know. But I certainly do know that liberalization has wounded the African coffee industry, and it has rather inflicted socio-economic difficulties on the 33 million resource-poor farmers and their families. The liberalization policy has failed to bring any growth to the African coffee sector.